From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.
Hi, friends. Are you looking for a new podcast? Maybe something you can share with your littles? Something that has some storytelling in it? Well, then look no further. We have Storytime with Philip and Mommy, where my son and I sit and discuss all the great books that you might love while we read them. So, Little Golden Books, Berenstain Bears, and even the new classics like Bluey. We sit down, we read, we discuss, and we have so much fun doing it. Come and join us. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Well, hello everybody. It's Mick Sullivan coming to you with the 99th episode of The Past and the Curious. That's right, episode number 99. I know I always say I'm excited about this one and it was a joy to work on, but I really mean it this time. I mean it every time, but I really mean it this time. This episode features two stories. One I've always wanted to tell, which is the story of the Bone Wars. You've probably heard about it or read about it if you know anything about dinosaurs. It's fascinating, and it goes to show how two people who probably should have gotten along didn't, and what a mess they made. The second story is about a ghost town, a genuine ghost town in Death Valley, California. And telling that story is friend of the show, world-famous musician, and fellow swimmer at the pool where I swim, Will Oldham, also known as Bonnie Prince Billy. So, stay tuned for that if you're a Bonnie Prince Billy fan. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoy episode 99. And as always, thanks for listening to The Past and the Curious. When Edwin Drinker Cope and Othniel Charles Marsh first met, the vibe in the room must have been electric. Good vibes all around. It was just that kind of day. In 1863, there were not many people as obsessed with ancient bones as these two guys. Pretty much everyone else in the world had no awareness, no interest, or no time to think about such things. Paleontology was new, and information was hard to come by. Plus, not many people saw the world, past or present, like these two science nerds. It was probably lonely to be a bone fanatic. So the fact that these two archaeology-obsessed Americans had found each other in Germany of all places was very surprising. What were the odds? Two men with more passion, thirst, and knowledge about ancient bones than nearly anyone else in the world somehow find each other in a foreign nation. It's just amazing. You might think that the immediate friendship would last a lifetime, and that the scientific pair would work together to change the world with their discoveries and undying friendship. Would you be right? You'd be worse than right. You'd be wrong. The good vibes did not last. Both men had traveled to Germany to learn and research, but also to avoid the Civil War raging in America. Following the war, they both returned to the States to continue their careers in the newish field of paleontology. Before the Civil War, another scientist, named Joseph Leidy, had assembled the first complete dinosaur skeleton in America, and it planted the seed for dinosaur mania. Mr. Leidy would be an important person to both Cope and Marsh, at least until they pushed him aside in their quest for more dramatic dinosaur discoveries. But for much of their career, Mr. Leidy loomed large over both men. Othniel Charles Marsh was born poor, but he had a wealthy uncle, his mom's brother, and Uncle George realized how smart little Othniel was and helped him with an education. Later, Othniel convinced his uncle to start a natural history museum on campus at Yale University, and since his very wealthy uncle had paid for it, he kinda got a job working there. It was a lucky break for a bona fide bone buff. Edwin Drinker Cope was a few years younger than Othniel, and his family were Quaker farmers in Pennsylvania. When it came to money, they did well, but not well enough for a family-funded job at Yale University. Cope had less training and access to money, so most of his education happened the old-fashioned way, both in class and by getting his hands dirty, working hard, and learning from whoever he could, including Joseph Leidy. Both men were very eager to make their mark in the scientific journals of the day and the history books that would come later. Both were also eager to uncover mysteries of the past held below the Earth's surface. Once back in America, the men exchanged letters and information. Things seemed friendly. Because so few dinosaurs had been methodically uncovered and cataloged, there was lots of new information and new discoveries to be had in the mid-1800s. Cope and Marsh were leading the pack. They knew they were working on something big, and they both respected each other. So among their early discoveries were dinosaurs that they named after one another. Cope found a dino he named the Tyonius marshi, and Marsh named one of his discoveries the Mosasaurus copianus. Then, one day, an invitation came. Cope's job in Philadelphia put him near a remarkably good excavation site, marl pits in Haddonfield, New Jersey. Not many people knew about the treasures in the exposed earth, but there on the crowded eastern seaboard of the United States, Cope was finding incredible prehistoric skeletons, and he wanted his friend Marsh to see. Marsh let his worse impulses get the better of him. He liked what he saw on the visit. He liked it so much that he stabbed Cope in the back. Not literally. That would have been unhinged. Marsh's treachery was more in secret. When Cope wasn't around, Marsh found the man in charge of the pits, and he told him,
"Hey, if you find something really awesome, how about you send it my way instead of to Cope? He's got enough, I promise. And besides, I'm smarter than him. Plus, I'll pay more. Here's a little money up front so you know that I'm for real."
Bad move, Marsh. The first shots of the Bone War were fired. Secrets like this don't stay secrets for long. Soon after Marsh's unfriendly arrangement with the man at the marl pit, Cope noticed that he wasn't getting as many bones from the New Jersey site as he had been. He also noticed that Marsh was publishing more and more articles about dinosaur discoveries he was making, but not really saying where the skeletons came from. Cope did the math and realized that Marsh had done him dirty. Nevertheless, Cope tried to move on. He had something important cooking anyway. You see, someone had sent him some very curious bones excavated from Kansas. He spent countless hours working with the collection, diligently researching similar skeletons and slowly piecing his back together. He came to believe this was something truly remarkable. Excitement bubbled in his body as it became clear to him that these bones belonged to something entirely new. Not just another dinosaur, a sea creature with a tremendously long tail, flippery feet, and a head connected closely to its powerful, broad body. It was unlike anything anyone else had ever found. This was a big deal. He put all the bones together. He wrote an article, which he published, complete with illustrations, and congratulated himself for finding an entirely new class of dinosaur. King Cope, the great dino hope. Feeling confident, he invited his old backstabbing buddy Marsh to see it. maybe so he could rub his face in it a little bit. As you can imagine, Marsh was surprised, but he was more surprised when he saw the skeleton, because something seemed off. It just didn't look quite right. Maybe Cope had got this mixed up? No way, said Cope. So they brought in Cope's old mentor, the famed Dr. Leidy. Leidy walked in, stood in front of the giant formation of bones, and looked at it quizzically. And then, without a word, he walked towards it, took the skull off, and put it at the end of the tail. Only, it wasn't a tail. He knew it was a neck. Cope had gotten the creature backwards and put the head on at the wrong end. As soon as he moved the skull, everyone realized that he was right.
You had the head on the butt. I moved it to the neck, where a head is supposed to be. Heads don't go on butts. You know this.
Nope, Cope. You've been a dope.
Cope was horrified. It was just a regular old plesiosaur. In his nearsighted effort to make a splash and beat Marsh, he had convinced himself of something wrong and embarrassed himself not just in front of his frenemy, but also Dr. Leidy. Perhaps more than anything, he was horrified that he had already published the paper with his glaring mistake. So he tried to buy every copy that had been published. Obviously, this was impossible, and a few copies remained in the hands of Marsh, who intended to use them to embarrass him a little further down the line. If he hadn't been in such a rush and wasn't working so hard to beat his rival, Cope would have benefited from what just happened. Scientists rely on something called peer review, where other experts review the work of each other. Everyone makes mistakes, but this process helps us weed out mistakes by having other experts critique it. That's why science changes. New information provides more evidence, and we can come to stronger and stronger conclusions. It's easy to fear criticism, but if done right, it's a good thing. People should be in favor of healthy criticism. It can make us better. Of course, in reality, Cope's work did get peer-reviewed, only it was done publicly, and after he published the paper, much to his embarrassment. The next few years were tremendous for both men. They looked out west to places like Wyoming, which were filled with bones just below the surface, or sometimes sitting right there on top, the trip over.
Whoopsie-daisy. Well, what do we have here? A Triposaurus?
Teams of people with shovels and pickaxes unearthed enormous amounts of bones for both men. But all along, they were always fighting over turf, with each guy constantly trying to get a leg up on the other. Cope and Marsh both hired spies to keep tabs on the rival crews. Bribes were even paid to train operators.
Hey, after all those bones are loaded up for delivery, why don't you just send them to me? He won't even know they're missing.
It's even believed that there were orders on what to do if a crew couldn't use or gather all of the bones on a dig. They were supposed to smash what was left so the other side couldn't use them. Who knows how much history was lost because of this childish competition? Nevertheless, great strides were made. Not in terms of maturity, but in terms of science, at least. In the winter of 1877 alone, the men documented, verified, and gave the world the knowledge of 3 of the most famous dinosaurs today: the Apatosaurus, the Stegosaurus, and the Triceratops. Kids everywhere love those dinos now, and it was one busy winter that unearthed them all. Obviously, their competition changed the world because they drove each other to work so hard. They rushed to publish papers, get their names in print with each discovery, and name as many new species as they could find. Between the two men, they discovered 126 new species of dinosaur, almost all from the western United States. But their competition also undid both of them. As they grew older, under financial stress and trying to remain relevant, they began trashing each other in the press. Each told stories to newspapers of treachery, accused the others of cheating, plagiarizing, or copying others, and generally made each other out to be monsters. It was pretty wild, but a lot of people reading newspapers in the 1800s liked stuff like this. It was salacious, filled with dirt and intrigue and general pettiness, like a dime store novel, but with world-renowned scientists and enemies in the middle of the story. Ultimately, both were embarrassed, and their careers took a hit. Each lost large amounts of their collection, either because they had to sell them to make ends meet, or the government and schools they used to work for took them because they had, after all, paid for their digs in the first place. It was a sad end to what could have been a great partnership. Just think, if they had worked together, what could they have accomplished? Still, they got a lot done, and the scientific process worked. Things that they got incorrect were corrected by others who followed in their path with more evidence. But a lot of what they did still stands. Think about that the next time you look at a Triceratops skull in a museum. Speaking of skulls, Edward Drinker Cope was the first to die in 1897, and he gave his skull to science. And he wanted Marsh to do the same when his time came. That way, they could prove whose brain was bigger. Cope wanted to take the competition to the afterlife. Marsh chose not to do so. It was about time that someone ended the feud.
All you need is a few minutes to start your day off with something historic when you listen to the This Day in History podcast. Every day there's a new episode for you to listen and learn about what happened that day way back when. Today could be the day a famous mobster met their end, or the first milestone for humans in space. Who knows what history today holds? Find out when you listen and subscribe to This Day in History wherever you get your podcasts. That's This Day in History wherever you get your podcasts.
We're the All Creatures Podcast. Each week, Angie and I explore and share amazing details about the many animals we share our world with.
Plus, Chris and I are both PhD scientists and educators. So we do the deep dives in the scientific research and then come back and share what we learn in a fun and casual way. We also speak with other scientists, animal experts, activists, and many other conservation enthusiasts from all over the planet.
So you can find the All Creatures Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
This month, You Have 30 Seconds comes from Lorenzo, who sent this a while back. I lost track of it, and I appreciate your patience, Lorenzo.
My name is Lorenzo, and I live in San Francisco. I want to tell you about being shanghaied on San Francisco's Barbary Coast. The Barbary Coast was known for having a lot of saloons, places where men would go to drink. These men thought they were just going in for a drink. Were they right? They were worse than right. They were wrong. During the California Gold Rush, ships would sail into San Francisco Bay, and sometimes their crew would run off and search for gold. To solve this problem, Barbary Coast bartenders would put knockout drops in the drinks of sailors and open a trapdoor. The sailors woke up and they would be at sea, often on their way to the city of Shanghai, China.
Yowza! I do not want to wake up on a mysterious boat anywhere. I want to know every boat that I am on and where it is going before I get on it. That's a good rule of thumb. I encourage you all to have that as a rule for yourselves as well. So thank you, Lorenzo. And if anyone else out there has a You Have 30 Seconds, I got a few more, but I'd love more and more and more. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you very much. Good job, Lorenzo.
It's quiz time. It's quiz time. It's quiz time. Time.
Okay, it's quiz time. I think. Yes, I just checked. It's quiz time. Well, so how about a question then? Yeah, question number 1. On how many continents have dinosaur fossils been found? Seven out of 7, baby. Every continent. Doesn't matter if you're in Australia, South America, or even Antarctica. Dinos left a little something behind for you. Speaking of leaving something behind, question number 2. In the fossil world, what are coprolites? Y'all, I made this question number 2 for a reason. You see, it's not just bones that can get fossilized to be found later. Poop can too. Coprolites is the scientific word for fossilized poop. And you'd be surprised what scientists can learn from fossil poop. Okay, the third and final question. Back in 1842, Sir Richard Owen created a term that we use today. Here's a hint. In Greek, it would mean fearfully great lizard. What word means fearfully great lizard? Yes, 1842, that is when the word dinosaur was first used. Dinos means fearfully great, and sauros means lizard, so thanks, Sir Richard Owens. Thanks a lot. And now to tell you the second story of the episode comes friend of the show, Will Oldham.
Take note, Death Valley is not the kind of place where you should lose yourself. In 1849, a group of travelers did not heed this important advice we are sharing with you, and they found themselves waiting for weeks to be rescued. Lured by the promise of gold in the California gold rush, the path these 49ers took led them close to the lowest point in North America, which also happened to boast some of the highest temperatures anywhere on the planet at that time. Faced with the endless, terrible, and dusty terrain, some abandoned the party for who knows what destiny. Others remained, suffering to survive with the few resources they had saved. Thanks to rescue efforts in 1850, the more fortunate families finally made it out. As the landscape faded behind them, someone in the group was said to have looked over their shoulder and coolly spoke these words which gave it the name we know today. Goodbye, Death Valley. Frank Harris knew this whole story, but it didn't keep him away. He was one of a handful of people seeking fortune in the vast and harsh desert. The big gold rush had faded, but there were still a few prospectors searching California, Nevada, and beyond, all hoping history might repeat itself. Frank was known to just about everyone as Shorty. He was short, yes, but he also wore clothes that were a few sizes too large for him. Perhaps big pants and shirts were all he could find out west, but the oversized clothes hanging from his body made him look even smaller. In 1904, 55 years after the lost 49ers named Death Valley, Frank Shorty Harris was exploring the land as a party of one. He wasn't totally alone, though. Planning to be out for a while, he traveled with 5 donkeys, all loaded down with plenty of food and water, as well as the necessary mining gear, just in case he made a strike. Passing by a nearly vacant mine that was only occasionally in operation, Shorty ran into another party of one, a man named Ed Cross. Ed had been working with a partner, but this prospector had wandered off into the sand and mountains on a mission that was taking a little too long for Ed's liking. Ed wasn't sure if the man was even coming back, so he considered joining Shorty. Shorty had a reputation among prospectors as a nice enough guy, and he had enough food to keep them both fed for weeks. Beyond sharing supplies, Shorty was also open to sharing anything of value they might encounter along the way, so the two became a pair. Not long after teaming up, the men awoke one morning to yet another desert sunrise which brought rapidly rising temperatures. But this sunrise also revealed other problems. The mules had wandered off overnight. While Ed cooked breakfast for 2, Shorty left camp to follow the footprints and retrieve the animals. Around the time he found the mules, he also found a greenish rock sitting high in the sun-baked sand. Curious, he gave it a whack with the pickaxe he was carrying. He bubbled with glee as the inside was revealed. There were bright yellow bands of gold. It was easy to see the gold was pure, better than any other gold he had found in his years as a prospector. Without hesitation, he ran back to camp, yelling the good news to Ed about what was waiting for them. And it turned out that Shorty was right. It was really pure, and therefore really valuable gold, and the area seemed to be filled with it. As nice as Shorty might have been, he did have one flaw. He couldn't keep his mouth shut. Before long, every prospector for 100 miles was staking a claim in the area. When they returned the next week, there were over 1,000 people there, all trying to get some of the newfound Death Valley gold. And that was how the town of Rhyolite began, as a bunch of camps and tents and wagons in the middle of the desert, 75 miles from any major supply hub. Rhyolite sat in the Bullfrog Mining District, a name that likely came from Shorty describing the abundance of lumpy greenish rocks in the area. More people found employment when the largest nearby commercial mine opened, the Montgomery Shoshone Mine. All of the people it brought meant the town-to-be needed supplies. It took a lot of work and money to get the essentials for life into the mining camp. Wagon loads of timber, food, and barrels of water showed up while loads of gold went out. The first buildings built in Rhyolite were wood and canvas, far from stable. Luckily, people wouldn't have to struggle with them for long. Early in 1905, the settlement started to grow into a small city in the remote and inhospitable western edge of Death Valley, some 120 miles north of Las Vegas. Other prospecting camps in the area saw the developments in Rhyolite, and their inhabitants began to move there too, quickly increasing the population. Streets were laid out, 36 blocks in total. Homes were built. Big, well-built general stores were soon stocked with goods carted in over the dry desert. But as would always be the case in Death Valley, water was a big issue. At great cost, pipes were run from springs, while barrels filled with water from elsewhere arrived to fill giant water tanks on platforms above the city. The population continued to grow. Work crews built beautiful buildings like the Cook Bank Building, an opera house, hotels, churches, and a school. Saloons, a hospital, a fire station, and a post office popped up too. And in 1907, the railroad showed up. They laid tracks right into town and built an incredible station to go with them. This made supplies easier to get, made getting gold out of the city more profitable, and made it easier for people to come to Rhyolite for a visit or to stay. Looking out the windows of a train car on the way in, a person would have seen endless desert, which probably seemed pretty unwelcoming to human life. But upon arriving in the town and stepping out of the station, most folks probably had a hard time making sense of their surroundings. Just 2 years before, there was nothing but dry desert. The town of Rhyolite now had paved concrete sidewalks, running water, and utility poles bringing electricity to the homes and businesses filled with people. A person could pick up the local paper, go watch a show, hear live music, eat dinner, or do just about anything else you could do in a major city. The people were so proud of their success that bottles of champagne were imported in a show of fanciness. There were so many bottles, in fact, that one man decided to build a house out of them. He lived in the bottle house for years. Clearly, Rhyolite rose from the ground up with remarkable speed. Unfortunately, it ended just as quickly. There were nationwide financial panics in 1907, but more importantly, the ugly truth reared its head. Mines eventually run out of ore. As the amount of gold pulled from the mines dropped, people were unwilling to invest more money. Without the mines keeping people working, most decided there was no reason to stay in the middle of the desert. Slowly, people left in search of other opportunities. At its height, as many as 10,000 people called Rhyolite home. But by 1910, just 3 years after many of the nicest buildings were built, the town's population had dwindled to only 675. Things can turn around quickly in a so-called boom town. If there's a boom of people, excitement, and economy tied to a place, there's usually a bust somewhere down the line. People thought Rhyolite might have been different. Why else would a town be built with such fantastic amenities? But when the gold was gone, the people soon followed. A few people hung around. The newspaper was published for another few years, but by 1914, one last train left Rhyolite. There was no coming back, because they pulled up the tracks. Useful and valuable, the railroad company laid the metal rails somewhere else, perhaps to carry people and goods to the next boom town. The few who remained in Rhyolite had to find other forms of transportation. By 1921, it was reported that only 2 residents remained, a mother and son who ran a hotel. Their business was slow. Over the years, many of the buildings were disassembled and moved to other towns. As you might imagine, a century of Death Valley weather has deteriorated many others. Today, the town of Rhyolite is still there. You can stop by for a visit if you're in the neighborhood. The hotel is long closed, though. Rhyolite is a genuine ghost town. No one lives there. Hasn't for nearly a century. But much remains, including the train station and the house built from glass bottles. Shorty Harris lived on, moving often like most of the other people who came through Rhyolite. In the 1920s, he visited Rhyolite one last time. It was empty by then, but his journey was much easier on account of the automobile he had to get him there. He died in 1934 at the age of 78 and was remembered as the last old-time prospector. It was his wish to be buried in Death Valley. And how can you say no to a guy like Shorty? It should also be known that while many people came and went, leaving a number of ghost towns to dot the map of Death Valley, some people had lived there continuously for centuries. The Timbisha Shoshone people have considered Death Valley to be their ancestral lands from a time long before Americans and Europeans ventured into the area. They were forced from the lands by the National Park Service in the 1930s. But around the year 2000, land was given back to them, and dozens of Timbisha households live today in the Desert Valley. Many still speak their native language.
Well, there you have it. Episode 99 of The Past and the Curious. And you know what that means. Episode 100 is right around the corner. So if you want to drop us a line and tell us where you are and what your favorite episode is or anything else, all the instructions are on the website. You can either email it or I have a mailing address, care of the Fraser History Museum. That's at thepastandthecurious.com. I have some stuff to share with that in a moment, but first I do want to offer my sincere gratitude to Will Oldham. It was really fun to work on that story, and I'm glad we got to do it, and I'm glad we got to share it with you. So, thank you, and thanks for listening again. Okay, I have Patreon people to thank. Dean in Connecticut. Dean, what's up? Thank you for your support. I'm so glad that you are out there listening. And speaking of listeners with support, Nolan, your dad, Brad Dad, told me that you, Nolan, really enjoy the show. And I'm so glad you really enjoy the show. Someone else who really enjoys the show is someone from Brooklyn, turning 9 in early November. His name is August. August, happy birthday to you. I hope that everything is splendid and the weather is beautiful and you get to do some fun stuff with people you care about. Thank you for listening. I'm so glad that you're out there. I'm glad. And then I do also have to thank a few people who have sent me notes, including someone named Sullivan Barrett. Hey, Sullivan, I'm not sure how you pronounce your last name. It might be Barrett, it might be Barrett, but I'm certain how you pronounce your first name because it's Sullivan. Can you imagine if I would have named one of my sons Sullivan? Sullivan? It's probably better that you got the name Sullivan. Thank you for sending a note congratulating us on 100 episodes. Likewise, Colette Wombles in North Carolina sent the most incredible artwork I could have possibly imagined. There's like 8 episodes drawn on here, everyone from Colonel Charles Young to Buster Keaton. It is amazing. Colette, if I haven't gotten word to you about how fantastic it is, thank you. I hope everything in North Carolina is good for you, and everything is smooth sailing. I really appreciate what you sent. It is absolutely beautiful. Great work. Max Riley from Concord, Ohio. I missed you when you visited the Fraser. I'm so sorry that I missed you. But someone that I didn't miss were Rowan and Terrell, who I met on a field trip, and those two dudes were awesome. Rowan and Terrell, great to meet you. Promised you a shout out. Run out of music, but I'm going to keep talking because the 100th episode, I am really excited. I like hearing from you all. So send what you got. And, well, maybe I don't have much more to say. Hey, this is The Past and the Curious. I'm Mick Sullivan. This is really fun for me to do, and I hope it's really fun for you to listen to. So let's just keep doing it. All right. Happy November, y'all. Oh, yeah. Be nice to people, okay? Be nice.